Welcome to Modern Crime Scope Channel, where we bring you gripping true crime documentaries, chilling mysteries, and real-life stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Each video dives deep into shocking cases, detailed investigations, and haunting accounts, all told in a clear and compelling way. If you're fascinated by true crime and the search for justice, this is the place for you. Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, four bright students whose lives were filled with laughter, friendship, and dreams for the future. But inside the walls of their King Road home, a nightmare unfolded that no one could have imagined. One roommate lived to tell the haunting details, a chilling account that would shake an entire town and leave investigators scrambling to uncover the face of the killer hiding in plain sight. The King Road house had always been a place where the energy of youth was impossible to ignore. Music floated from its windows, laughter spilled out onto the lawn, and the sound of footsteps echoed across the creaky floors at all hours of the day. To outsiders, it looked like a typical college home, a place where friends gathered, studied, celebrated, and lived freely. But as the months grew colder, the atmosphere inside began to shift. There was an edge to the air that no one could explain, a subtle sense that something was out of place. It wasn't the kind of change that announced itself loudly. It was quiet, hidden in the corners of everyday life. Neighbors noticed details they didn't dwell on at the time. A car parked down the street late at night, its headlights dimmed as though its driver didn't want to be noticed. A figure sometimes lingering at the edge of the property, too far away to be identified but close enough to stir unease. These moments blended into the background of college life, dismissed as nothing more than coincidence or imagination. Students came and went at all hours, so nothing seemed particularly alarming. Yet, for the people inside the house, there were fleeting moments when the comfort they once felt began to thin. Some of the roommates started locking their doors more often, not out of fear, but out of habit. One thought she heard noises at night, soft enough to dismiss yet strange enough to make her pause. Another felt the sensation of being watched when walking from her car to the front door. These feelings were brushed off, buried beneath the noise of everyday life, because no one wanted to admit that their sanctuary might not be safe. After all, the King Road house wasn't just a building, it was a home, a place filled with warmth, shared secrets, and the promise of belonging. But underneath that warmth was something darker, something they couldn't see. The walls that once protected them would soon hold a silence so heavy it would never be forgotten. Each creak of the floorboards, each shadow that flickered in the corner, would take on a different meaning once the truth came out. The sense of unease was not just paranoia. It was the first whisper of danger creeping closer. The town itself seemed blissfully unaware. Streets were quiet, coffee shops bustled, and the rhythm of student life carried on. No one suspected that behind the glow of the King Road windows, an invisible threat was waiting. The roommates carried on with their lives, unaware that they were being pulled into a story that would shake the very foundation of their community. The quiet house on the hill stood as it always had, but the safety it once promised was already gone, stolen by the presence of someone who did not belong. The night of November began like countless others in the college town, a mixture of ordinary routines and fleeting moments of celebration. The King Road house glowed faintly against the dark hillside, its windows lit with the warmth of young lives unfolding. Music played softly in one room while laughter drifted from another, a reminder that the people inside were unaware of what was to come. Cars pulled into driveways, doors opened and closed, and the rhythm of student life carried on, with no hint of the darkness about to descend. As the night grew later, the town slipped into silence. Bars closed their doors, streets emptied, and houses along the street darkened one by one. Inside the King Road home, the energy slowly faded as the roommates prepared for sleep. Upstairs, lights dimmed, phones were set aside, and the faint hum of the refrigerator became the loudest sound in the quiet house. It was the kind of silence that usually brought rest, but on this night, it cloaked something far more sinister. In the stillness of the early morning hours, the atmosphere shifted. A faint creak of wood echoed on the staircase, subtle enough to blend with the natural groans of an old home, but unsettling if one were awake to hear it. The figure that moved through the house carried an eerie calm, stepping carefully as though every sound mattered. The walls that had always felt protective now became accomplices, muffling noises and hiding the truth of what was happening inside. The rooms upstairs, once places of comfort, suddenly became vulnerable spaces. The creaking floorboards marked a path of intrusion, carrying with them the weight of dread. The unknown figure moved with deliberate intent, leaving no time for anyone inside to understand what was unfolding. Shadows stretched long in the dim light, casting twisted shapes across the hallways, while the air grew colder with each passing second. By the time the violence erupted, the silence was broken in ways that would never be forgotten. The brutality of the attack clashed against the innocence of the setting. It was swift, merciless, and utterly shocking in its precision. For those inside, there was no warning, no chance to prepare for the chaos that shattered their safety. The very house that had once offered laughter, music, and belonging became a prison of terror in a matter of moments. When it was over, the intruder slipped away with the same chilling calmness with which they had entered. The town remained asleep, unaware that a nightmare had unfolded in the quiet hours of the morning. The street outside was still, the air crisp with the cold bite of November, while inside the house lay a silence so heavy it seemed to cling to the walls themselves. By dawn, the King Road house was no longer the lively gathering place it had been only hours before. Instead, it stood as a silent witness to an unimaginable horror, holding secrets that would soon ripple across the entire community. The sun rose slowly over the town, casting a pale light on the King Road house, but inside, the atmosphere remained suffocating. One roommate stirred from sleep with a sense of unease that she could not explain. The quiet seemed unnatural, heavy in a way that pressed against her chest. She noticed details that did not belong to an ordinary morning, the absence of familiar sounds, the strange stillness in a house usually buzzing with movement, the faint echo of something she could not place. Each step she took toward her door was weighted with hesitation, as if her body already knew that crossing into the hallway would mean confronting something she was not prepared to see. She opened her door only slightly and froze. The air outside her room carried a chill that sent a ripple down her spine. From the corner of her vision, she thought she caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow that seemed too swift to belong to anyone she knew. Her breath caught in her throat, and in that moment, instinct told her to retreat. The house, once her sanctuary, now felt like it was holding its breath along with her. Somewhere beyond her door, she heard the sound of slow, deliberate breathing. It was faint, yet it carried an unmistakable weight, the presence of someone who should not have been there. She backed away quietly, her hands trembling as she reached for the comfort of her room. She did not dare to call out. Every second stretched endlessly, each tick of the clock amplifying the sound of her own heartbeat. Hours passed in agonizing silence, with her locked away in fear, too afraid to step out, too afraid to confirm what she already suspected. The thin walls of the house seemed to close in on her, magnifying every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the window. She tried to convince herself that she was imagining things, that her mind was inventing horrors that did not exist. But the memory of that shadow lingered, unshakable and cold. When daylight finally spilled into her room, courage came in fragments. She stepped out again, hoping that the night had been nothing more than a trick of her imagination. But the moment her eyes adjusted to what lay before her, the truth struck with a force that stole her breath. The house bore scars of a violence she could not have imagined. What she had dismissed as a shadow was no illusion. It had been the shape of danger passing only feet from where she had hidden. Her survival felt like both a blessing and a curse. Every detail of that night etched itself into her memory. The heaviness in the air, the rhythm of unfamiliar breathing, the sensation of being watched without knowing it. These fragments became pieces of a haunting puzzle. Details that investigators would later cling to as they tried to understand what had happened on King Road. But for her, they were more than evidence. They were reminders of how close she had come to becoming another victim of the nightmare that had stolen the life from her home. The King Road house was no longer a place of laughter and friendship when authorities arrived. What they encountered inside tested the limits of their composure and professionalism. The scene was brutal, overwhelming in its detail, and unlike anything the small town had ever faced. Police officers stood in silence as the magnitude of the crime settled over them. Outside, yellow tape was strung across the familiar lawn, a chilling boundary between the ordinary world and the horrors that lay within. For neighbors, the house they had passed by so casually was suddenly transformed into the epicenter of fear, and whispers of dread spread quickly through the community. Detectives began their work with painstaking precision, cataloging every object, every trace, every possible clue. The floors told a story of violence, but one that was fragmented and incomplete. It was clear that the crime had not been spontaneous. The nature of the attack suggested planning, perhaps weeks of observation. The entry point, the timing, the deliberate path through the house all pointed to someone who knew what they were doing. Yet, despite the brutality, the killer had slipped away without leaving obvious signs of panic. This calm departure unsettled investigators most of all, for it spoke of a confidence rarely seen. As news spread, the town fell into a state of disbelief. Parents called their children with voices shaking, demanding to know they were safe. Students looked over their shoulders on the walk home from campus. The streets emptied earlier than usual, the sense of freedom replaced with a collective anxiety. Nobody knew if the killer was a stranger passing through or someone who lived among them. Each rumor fueled more fear, and each unanswered question added weight to the already suffocating silence hanging over King Road. Digital evidence became the investigators' lifeline. Phone records, surveillance cameras, and fragments of online activity were pulled together in hopes of forming a timeline. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen unusual activity that night. Some reported hearing noises they had ignored, while others mentioned a strange car parked for too long on the street. These small details began to form patterns, though none offered the full picture. Every lead mattered, but none yet brought the clarity the case demanded. Forensic teams worked tirelessly inside the house, combing through every room. Tiny details, the angle of a footprint, the trace of fabric fibers, were carefully bagged and labeled. Specialists analyzed fingerprints and DNA samples, but the process was slow, leaving investigators frustrated by the gap between urgency and results. In their minds, the most troubling thought lingered. While they pieced together the crime, the person responsible could be watching the investigation unfold, hiding in plain sight, and perhaps even enjoying the chaos he had created. The King Road house, once vibrant and alive, now stood as a dark monument to the unknown. Police guarded it day and night, not only to preserve evidence but also to contain the unease it radiated. It was no longer just a crime scene. It had become a symbol of vulnerability, a reminder that even the safest places could harbor unimaginable horror. The investigation was only beginning, but already it was clear that uncovering the truth would test the resolve of everyone involved. Weeks passed, but the shadow of the King Road murders did not fade. Instead, the tension in the community grew sharper with every day the killer remained unidentified. Students who once walked freely across campus now traveled in groups, constantly glancing behind them. Residents checked their locks twice before bed, listening for the slightest noise in the night. Fear had woven itself into every corner of the town, and the house on King Road stood silent. guarded by patrol cars, its windows dark and unwelcoming. It had become both a crime scene and a symbol of unanswered terror. The investigation reached a critical point when small fragments of evidence began to align. A stray shoe print, overlooked at first, matched a pattern found in a store hundreds of miles away. DNA recovered from an object in the house linked to a profile buried deep in a database. Surveillance footage, grainy and unclear, captured a vehicle circling the neighborhood at suspicious hours in the weeks before the murders. Each piece on its own seemed inconsequential, but together they pointed toward a chilling conclusion. The killer had been preparing, studying, and waiting for the right night to strike. The surviving roommate's account became a cornerstone in the investigation. Her memory of the figure passing by her door, tall and masked, was hauntingly precise. Investigators compared her description against potential suspects, narrowing their focus until a name emerged. The suspect was not an outsider passing through, but a familiar face, someone who had blended into the fabric of ordinary life without attracting suspicion. He had attended community events, driven the same roads as everyone else, and walked unnoticed in crowded spaces. To many, he had seemed unremarkable. To investigators, he now appeared monstrous. When the arrest finally came, it shocked the entire town. Officers moved in with calculated precision, surrounding the suspect's home before dawn. Neighbors awoke to flashing lights and hushed voices, peering out from behind curtains as law enforcement led the man away in handcuffs. The image of him, quiet and almost expressionless, was burned into their memories. This was the face of the one who had shattered their sense of safety, the one who had turned the King Roadhouse into a place of nightmares. In the days that followed, details emerged that deepened the horror. Investigators discovered records of searches, notes, and maps, all pointing to an obsession with the lives of those inside the house. The crime had not been random, but meticulously planned. Every move had been calculated, every weakness studied. The thought that someone could live so close, hiding intentions so dark, left the community shaken in ways words could not fully capture. For the surviving roommate, the revelation was unbearable. Her memory of that night, the sound of breathing in the hallway, the shadow that lingered outside her door, was now tied to a face and a name. She realized how close she had come to being part of the tragedy and how her survival had become the thread that unraveled the mystery. Yet survival brought its own burden, endless questions of why she had been spared and why her friends had not. The King Road murders ended with an arrest, but the scars remained. The town, once lively and carefree, would never look at the quiet house the same way again. Its walls held a story of terror, survival, and truth revealed too late. And in every shadow, every sound in the night, the memory of what happened there lingered. A chilling reminder that evil can wear an ordinary face and walk unnoticed among us all.